I really needed to stop raining. Hey guys, I'm Rebecca Brocton and welcome to my channel. So you may be aware of the recent Magento x Google love affair that's been announced and their collaborative efforts to bring progressive web apps to the Magento community in 2018. But what are progressive web apps? Why do we need them? What do they do? Well, according to some Googling that I did on the matter, we all know that there are billions of mobile users in the world, and a lot of them are using their phones to shop online, and we're trying to make it easier for them to do that. But did you know that only 13% of a user's time is spent in the mobile web, and 87% of our time is spent in native apps? But we are extremely concentrated on the native apps that we use, and 80% of the 87% time that we spend in native apps is spent in our top 3 apps. So I did a bit of research into my top 3 apps. So settings, battery, last 7 days. So my top 3 apps are Instagram at 14%, music at 12%, and mail and WhatsApp and photos all take joint third at 7%, with Twitter coming in underneath there at 6%. Safari or Chrome, any web browser hasn't even made it onto my top 7. My top 7. Can I count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My top 6. I can't count. And I thought I spent a lot of time in the browser. Apparently not. Basically, even if you're a retailer with a native app, unless you find yourself in the top 3 for most of your downloaders, you're not going to see the return you expected. So with this, why hasn't the web been more disruptive against native apps? It all comes down to capabilities. Native apps are faster, they're more reliable, they can work offline, they can do things like push notifications to bring you back and keep you addicted, they can sync quicker, they can sense more, they can react better to the actions that you're performing on your phone, and generally they have a hold on the mobile that the web just doesn't. I mean, the web is more often safer and more respectful to your privacy. It still lacks those UX features that apps have that keep people addicted, that keep people coming back, that remind them to come back. But the strength that the web does have over apps is reach. I mean, the average mobile user downloads 0 apps per month. 0. None. Like, how can you compete with stats like that when you launch your app, when the average user is not going to download it? Whereas we visit over 100 mobile websites using our browsers. So we may spend less time in our browsers, but we go more places. We do more. We use more. So with that, what if we could give the web the powers of native apps along with its extremely broad reach? Possibilities are endless. That's what progressive web apps are set to achieve. All the features, all the user experience, all the nativity of apps, but still the reach and the flexibility of web. This really got me excited. This is great. This is how the web should be. I wanted to find out more. And who better to ask than Magento's Frontend Architect himself, James Zetlen. Nervous.
Good afternoon.
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm really good, yeah.
Good to meet you.
You too. Oh, I feel like we should have met before now.
Yeah, sort of news of your influence has spread far and wide, for sure.
That's scary. That is scary.
It was scary for me. I was like, oh no, she's the keeper of the flame, you know? What if she hates me? But yeah, I should have made it to MLUK. I had a family conflict, but that was especially a disappointment for me because obviously I was really excited for our announcement there. And
yeah.
Shall we do an edit point? Edit point.
Edit point, cut. So you've been at Magento for 8 months, is that right? 9 months?
Just about 8 months, yeah.
And Frontend Architect. So what does that mean?
I'll let you know when I find out.
Yeah, I've been saying the same thing when people ask me what I do.
Yeah. It's sort of an old joke, but like specifically for me, there already were people who had the role of architect at Magento pretty broadly. Like Alan Kent, obviously, most prominently, and Anton Krill and others. And they do things that I couldn't even begin to fathom. I occupy a sort of different space. And it's not just because my expertise is more on the front end, but that, those gentlemen have extremely disciplined minds. My responsibility is to act as a kind of a bit of a gadfly, as it turns out, and make sure that whatever best practices are coming to bear in the front end space that's just moving so dramatically quickly, that I kind of have to leverage a combination of intuition and long experience in front end to know which ones we really need to pay attention to and start to bet on. And PWA was one of those things. I did not bring it to the attention of everyone. People had known about it here, but I've been part of the choice to start to move in that direction. So yeah, I mean, the role itself has been pretty broad, has been across our different products, not just Magento Digital Commerce and the framework, but also the order management team in Barcelona and the business intelligence team to some extent in Pennsylvania. So originally, I think there was this broad mandate to try and bring best practices to front end practice across Magento. And as it's begun to crystallize, well, we already have a lot of that. We have a lot of good best practices. There's really smart people here doing good front end stuff. Yeah. We just need to orient it, give it direction, and make some just choices about what technologies to choose and what of like competing approaches that start to emerge. The various like squabbles that exist out in front end. What side to choose and why. So PWA is a kind of convenient excuse for me to crystallize those choices already.
That sounds good.
But there's a bunch of other cool stuff going on.
Is it all NDA?
Oh. Yeah, but I mean, I can lie freely about it, so I'll weave a cool tale. No, some of it's NDA, some of it's not. I think a large part of it is just that we know that when we say something or when we drop the name of a technology, that we are kind of scrambling a whole lot of fighter jets in the various SI communities. Yeah. And people don't want to go on a long research jag because they're so enthusiastic and then find out later, like, oh, sorry, I meant the other thing.
Yeah, they change your mind. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's
so we're trying to be careful for everyone's sake. But yeah, like the day-to-day work of this is like pretty strategic, which like you went from development to other stuff is pretty similar for me. Heretofore, I was working closer to code and writing code and to some extent designing code. And now there's more direction setting. The lever is longer, and I'm helping to help people to design code. It was strange. It was weird.
So with progressive web apps, what made you choose to go running down that route? What stood out there?
Well, again, I want to emphasize I didn't choose it. I don't want to paint a picture of me like showing up, telling everyone like, have you heard? The Progressive Web App Initiative was jointly created and jointly researched by our biz dev people, by our senior management and otherwise. But, when I got wind of it, I did I was asked, is this good? Is this something we should pursue? And after a little looking, I said, super yes. And part of it is that I've been around a long time, despite my unearthly youthful appearance. I have been in this business for 12, 13 years now.
Wow.
Doing dev, and I was fortunate enough to ride the JavaScript wave to some extent. I became a local domain expert right when it became like super huge to know that. And I watched as it became strictly necessary to know prototype and Scriptaculous, and then strictly necessary to know jQuery. And then strictly necessary to understand a little bit more structured of a front end approach, like for instance, Backbone, or what are the other early ones? Dojo, YUI, EXTJS, and then a more broad based effort to do responsive design, and then object oriented CSS. And this is a sort of a weird laundry list. What each of those things has in common is that there was an inflection point at which it transitioned from a new thing that seems really cool that you should probably check out to effectively mandatory, to the new baseline begin with. And then, if you choose not to implement it, then you're deviating on purpose. Maybe you're doing something weird, but now it's the rule. And the most recent big example of that was responsive web design and responsive web development, which quickly switched from a neat trick where you can resize the browser window into like a bunch of people telling each other, hey, I think this was always the way to make websites. And it just took us a while. It took us a while to figure it out. I mean, for responsive specifically, I've done talks, and the original proposal of responsive, the coinage of the term, Ethan made a great point that the web was never supposed to be a medium that emulated print. And so it makes sense for us to get our sort of PDF formatting and document design, PageMaker kind of brains turned off and replace them with the notion of abstract surfaces and like take advantage of what the web does. So instead of like, you should have breakpoints, it was reimagine what the web is. And
forget everything.
And even though, yeah, and even though that began as a pretty heady idea, is like, if you better be on a list apart RSS feed if you care about this. Eventually, it became so standard that we now just understand the web to be such a medium. And that was not always the case. With PWAs, I think that, like responsive, it evolved as a sort of a knee-jerk reaction to some extent to some of the sins and ills of modern web development. And it's already now being articulated as, hey, this set of principles is what the web was supposed to be and is supposed to be. So let's try and like redefine ourselves as this. So that's why I felt like, oh, I've seen this before. This is that type of phenomenon. Let's just, instead of trumpeting ourselves as PWA, and to some extent because of the vagaries of marketing, we have to do that. But instead of like internally talking about how we're going to do this special PWA thing, we're trying to use it as an opportunity to redefine, improve ourselves, and set a new baseline for what web development should be.
Yeah. Like we keep saying like PWA, progressive web apps, and we're probably talking a little bit too much like people know what they are.
Yeah.
Like I found. Have you heard the latest Magetalk episode that they released? Was it yesterday or some other time?
I put on Magetalk and I like realize I've done 80 chores. And I don't know what happened. I'm like, the house is perfect. The lawn is perfect. I just got to work, but what was Phil talking about?
Yeah.
That's what happens to
me. So he mentioned progressive web apps, and Phil asked Kalen to describe what progressive web apps are, and he couldn't. He was like, I've read about it ages ago, and I kind of like said, yeah, I know it. And he was like, and then now when I'm trying to explain it, he couldn't do it. And I think like progressive web apps tend to have this like almost air of mystery about them. It's like people know but don't know. Do we know? Like I kind of see it as they're websites that have been bitten by like a radioactive spider, and now they have superpowers, like super web powers that it was thought only native apps could achieve.
Okay. So I think what you've done here is a bit of gotcha journalism, where if you didn't need to know any more than the perfectly accurate picture you already have, why did you have me on? Just to find out if...
No, I want to know more, because I get it, but I don't get it.
But you're already exactly correct. It was a radioactive spider. So a progressive web app is one of those names that a company or an organization gives to a family of technologies to try to like get a good marketing push out about it. And that's necessary, right? But a progressive web app is what Google and other entities that are agreeing on this decided to call this phenomenon of building a web application that is supposed to be exactly the same experience as a native app to your eye, to your hand on a phone. And furthermore, to take advantage of some cool new features of mobile browsers and mobile operating systems, so that it has some of the special superpowers of a native app, like push notifications, or climbing walls. And there's a whole lot of moving parts, I suppose. Not all of them are strictly necessary for a progressive web app. But the overall way to identify one is does this app do stuff to make itself seem as rich and as native feeling of an experience as the app you'd download from your phone's app store? And, reading between the lines, obviously, it's a fairly mobile-focused approach, much in the same way that responsive web design was hey, we should look at these other viewports. But in principle, a progressive web app works the same on the desktop, although it may have like a slightly different feel or a bit of UX. So really, it's like, this is the name you give to an app that's trying to do all the cool modern stuff in an extremely disciplined way, because that's what you need to get that cool native feel. So it has to be fast, and it has to be really intelligent about it. It has to respect the fact that the networks are, even as they're increasingly pervasive everywhere, they're also increasingly unreliable for the various reasons. And people's expectations rise to the point where, if there are 4 subway platforms down, like, that YouTube video better load, man. So the progressive web app has, just like a lot of different features. But the bottom line is, if it's a thing that's clearly like taking that next level up kind of approach to feeling native, in a bunch of different ways that it's almost hard to put your finger on, that's probably what it's trying to do. There's a more formal definition. There are a few boxes it should check, and we can get into those if you're curious.
I am, yeah. Of course I am. I'd love to know more. Like, I don't really understand how they work.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, no one actually does. Scientists are still trying to determine what progressive web apps, where they came from, what they want from us. They're
like an alien.
There is, So there is probably a single technology that is most emblematic of progressive web apps, though it's not the whole thing. And that's service workers, which is a pretty abstract notion. And I would make this analogous to how there's a lot of different approaches and techniques to responsive web design, but kind of the centerpiece new technology at the time was media queries. It was the ability to describe in your CSS like what kind of device experience, capabilities your style rules should be aimed at.
Yeah.
What a service worker is it's a way of describing in extreme imperative programming detail how your application should interact with the internet, how your web page should interact with the web. Oh no, seriously?
Oh, that's the worst.
Oh God. So imagine that my nasal passages right now are the internet. Imagine that they have been stopped up for reasons unknown to you or to me. This is going to completely stop me. If I just have to keep on churning on this request, what am I going to do? Now imagine that I have like another thread in my mind that goes, well, what you're doing right now is not just purely trying to get your face as comfortable as possible. What you're trying to do is conduct an interview with somebody. So put it aside. Okay, you may not be able to look your best right now. You may be holding a tissue like you're about to, sneeze, but instead you have to keep talking. The other thread in my head that can sort of meta-analyze what's happening to the rest of my face is the service worker. It's the thing that says, all right, you got like 4 outstanding requests for images, 6 outstanding requests for JavaScript files. The network says it's off. Buddy, you're going to have to say something about how the internet's not here. And the application can respond to that. In the past, web apps needed to, deal with each individual request for a resource separately with no help, no safety net. The service worker is a way for a web app to install special functionality that can help it deal with all sorts of internet situations.
Right, so if it can't load a certain video, it doesn't just freak out and stop. It kind of skips over it in a way.
Mm-hmm. Or if you were browsing like the entire shoes section or the entire lawnmower section of your favorite store, and then the train went into a tunnel, you were still deciding between 3 products, and as it turns out, your phone has already loaded all 3 of those products. Well, as you know from a website, a lot of the time your phone will try to reload the page that it was just on, just because it goes, it's a bit stale. So a service worker would allow your application to intelligently say, look, the catalog is unlikely to have changed in the duration of your session. I know what I am. I'm an e-commerce app. I'm not going to ask the internet for the page I was just at. I'll keep that in cache. So it, as much as possible, allows you to continue your shopping experience, to continue your user experience, and just leave the internet out of it if it has to.
Okay, so you can go back and forth between your lawnmowers that you were picking from without internet connection.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this sounds magic, and especially to a technical person who would say what is a service worker implementation, and why does it know all these special e-commerce things? It super does not. What a service worker is it's a JavaScript protocol. It's a JavaScript API that you implement by sending a special file to the browser and marking it in the metadata for your site as being the service worker. And then the web browser that supports service workers will load this file, install it on the local browser specific cache for that site, and then set it as a proxy that handles all network requests. And most significantly, I think, this JavaScript runs on a separate thread, which normally JavaScript is confined to a single thread, making it inappropriate for certain types of multitasking. But in this case, the service worker is running out of process, outside of the thing that's doing rendering, so it can handle difficult, complex, or weird tasks, and you don't need a specific application architecture to route all sorts of requests through it. So in the case of e-commerce, an intelligent service worker of the sort that I just described that would go, oh, this is catalog, I'll load it from cache, that would have to be programmed. Somebody would have to write a service worker that understands that. And that's what, we would increasingly do as we support PWAs in our modules.
So these service workers can do most things then? It can be written to do most things?
Yeah, there are restrictions and security, both security and sort of scale restrictions to the way service workers operate. They need to be installed on secure sites only. They will refuse to install on a non-HTTPS page. But of course, if you're using an HTTP page, I mean, what? I'm sorry for you. What is it, 2009?
Yeah.
You just went super bad on DVD? What's going on with you? There's an increasing push prior to service workers to move everything to HTTPS only. So we don't envision that as a problem, but it is a stopgap security wise that keeps service workers secure. They also do not get to interact with the live objects that exist in your actual browser's JavaScript thread. So for instance, if I have an object that's storing current state, or I'm entering my password into a text field, the only place where my password's characters are stored is in memory. At no point do they get serialized, marshaled, and sent across a boundary that isn't HTTPS. The service worker can't say, get that input's value. Instead, it has to communicate with the browser's thread via special messages.
Okay, so that I was going to ask about security actually. So, if it got hacked, it could just go, give me that password.
Yeah, I mean, you can mess up, right? But this is not in principle. It's not significantly different than performing AJAX requests of any sort. It's just that there is a proxy that can intercept and manipulate AJAX requests or replace their responses prior to them actually exiting to the information superhighway, as it were.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So the service worker is the main thing, right? It's what enables the offline mode. It's what enables aggressive and intelligent caching. And then there are other aspects of progressive web apps which depend on a service worker as a substrate or just have other cool functionality. But, I could talk for the rest of this. It could be 45 minutes later and I'm like, a push notification works on Android the way that, and you don't care. So there's a lot of cool stuff. You can interact with phones, push notification systems in the way that a native app can. You can, in the case of Android, if you have a special manifest, you can get your app to be drag and droppable onto the home screen in exactly the same way that a native app is. And in iOS, this is not here yet, but it will be. They're going to do it. It's just they got to move slower because they're fancy. And there's interactions that you can do once you've registered a progressive web app properly with native payment APIs, so that you have just that extra layer of trusted native security.
Apple Pay, I'm guessing, and Android
Pay.
Yeah,
Android Pay too, or even there's some stuff that Chrome is starting to do with adding really cool secure payment interfaces. Boy, did they say I could say that?
Well,
there's other stuff. I would say that the main thing about a PWA though is that through and through, from the service worker all the way up, including any other cool technology you might care about, be they CSS animations or caching or web workers or lazy loading. The PWA has to focus on performance to the exclusion of anything that might super interfere with performance. So when you use Google's tool to decide how good a progressive web app is, it's called Lighthouse, it gives you a score of 0 to 100. And Lighthouse's scores will do some checklist type stuff, like, do you have a service worker? Do you have a manifest with icons? But more than anything, it's going to say, is your app stupid slow? Is it loading a bunch of data it shouldn't? And so the main thing you concentrate on, from the way you design your minification and your script bundling, all the way up to how you do your UX and what sort of interfaces and behaviors you make in your branding vision, it all has to focus on being so performant that at no point do you get any of that web jank where it doesn't scroll when you move your finger. That's the key. It's got to feel native. Otherwise, people get into that uncanny valley. You know what I mean? Something that's almost human, but not quite, like a zombie or...
Oh, right, yeah, like a half-dead. It's like a half-dead native app.
Like that robot head that like kind of talks to you, but not really. The uncanny valley in the web is like something that is acting like it knows what it's doing, but it's super not. A website that's not loaded, like the search box, the autocomplete isn't working.
Yeah.
We want to avoid that. And PWAs are really about taking all the steps that you possibly can at being really smart about avoiding that.
How hard is it going to be for you guys at Magento?
Well,
is it going to take a long time?
Yeah.
Like, how much are you working with Google as well? Or is it mostly in-house?
It's mostly in-house so far. Like, Google is committed to helping people get progressive web apps out the door. They do these cool things where they bring in folks from not only us, but our competitors too. I won't beat around the bush, and sit folks down in a big room and talk about what PWAs are and see what specific challenges in here and those implementers like areas of expertise. Like, is it e-commerce? Is it social? Google wants to know, and they want to talk to you about what you can do. And so, they're helpful in that respect. With us, their particular deal with us involves us being well positioned because of our huge reach and our expertise on board. We have more and more front-end expertise to be a great showcase for the progressive web app being achievable by folks with less resources and less like super up-to-date bleeding edge front-end hipster skills. To me, that's the big thing, is we can give to Google the proof that you don't have to be a Twitter or in order to do a great PWA. We have a whole lot in the works besides just we're going to make a PWA that's going to help that happen. I think that's the main thing for us that makes us special to them.
No, that's interesting.
What they're going to do is at some point they'll give us some help of various sorts. That helps us to push out a prototype, an example. But to me, the key part of the MVP, the minimum viable product of that prototype, is not just like, hey, it checks the Lighthouse box, on to the next thing, but that it's something that is both a teaching tool and a modular development system for people so that they can make their own PWAs. Because look, here's where I might deviate from the Google party line a little bit. Having worked in front end for a long time, I can say that there are differences in the way that Google approaches how to do web development than other companies and other folks who are also innovators on the web. And if there is a major criticism to be levied at Google's approach, it's that they are very tightly focused on the experience of the web user to the exclusion sometimes of the experience of the web developer. They are happy to make it harder on the dev. They're like, look, your user is a grandma in India. Your user is a 10-year-old with no attention span. Yeah, I'm sorry that it's hard. Learn your algorithms, know what TCP handshakes are, and do the web right. And to some extent, they can't be faulted. They're the ones making the browser that has to handle all of our dumb crap.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
But I also but I also believe that part of why the web succeeded is because it lowered the barrier to entry to make experiences. Web browsers, they don't like bail out with an exception if you don't close an HTML tag. First UI system to be so forgiving, you know what I mean? Like, you and I were like sitting there like hacking together weird web pages, and if it constantly gave us a compiler error with a strange message every time we tried to do something, we would have given up. We would have just done something else. I think the web won because of that. And so even though it may sacrifice a bit of that laser focus on the user, I think you have to think about that developer's experience. Now, Google does think about it. They're not ignorant of it. But it's my responsibility, I feel, to pull the PWA initiatives in that direction where I feel that they could be pulled. And I want the PWA development experience to be able to take anything that can be automated, like, say, ascertaining what part of the CSS is critical for above the field positioning, and what is not critical and can be lazy loaded, which is a formal concept, by the way, in the PWA universe, critical CSS. I think that can be automated to some extent. And so if it can be, you want to do it. And you want to do it flexibly enough that when people add new UIs, when they add new routes, when they add new functionality and feature work, that they don't have to keep on jumping out of their feature brain and into their structure brain to do the PWA bookkeeping. You want to automate that as much as possible. And I think that's our main challenge and the thing that we're the most focused on right now. So that when the Rebecca of 2018 starts to do their first web thing, it's still a great PWA, and they can still just do the cool thing without having to worry about the boiler.
Talking of the community, just jumping around a bit, their post in the community forums about the progressive web apps, there's quite a few people that posted on that about the framework. So my first question is, what frameworks were in the pot for choice?
Well, you can kind of assume, I think, without being in that room, that there's a few things we'd throw away right away. They're too old, they're not being actively developed, or they're too weird and too hard. We're not going to make people write Clojure script to make a Magento site, much as I think they'd benefit, because if you render everything from the root and you impose immutable data structures from the language construct, we're going to obviously be focused on kind of mainstream things. So, people know the names of the modern frameworks that we would consider. And there's also probably a sizable faction that wonders if we'll just invent our own from scratch, which is the kind of thing that we have done. Yeah, Magetrain. Majangular. Riento. There is a clear set of choices to be made, and we have made some of them. But that's one place where we have to be careful about dropping bombs on the community, because we are still in a sort of a proof of concept phase. Right now, I can tell you, first of all, we are going to be moving a lot of our build tooling onto front-end standard build systems. We already have some of that, like Grunt in Magento. It's great that it's there. People have done some great scratch work bringing in alternate build systems, Gulp or Webpack. Increasingly, those are going to become part of our production pipeline. We're going to find clever ways to do it that let in as many people as possible. So I can say without any discretion at all, we're going to be betting more and more on Node.js as the development scripting system that you run your build tooling on top of. So I think people can count on that at least. With regards to, as you said, the framework, the thing that runs at runtime, I can say less because we are still working on the prototype that will help us to make the final decision.
That's fair enough. That makes sense.
So stuff that we've already gotten done enough that we're making tremendous progress on it is, hey, we're doing Node. We're going to find these cool ways to make sure that it's inclusive. We have another parallel development track going that is making actual PWA components and concepts that lock together and that allow people to extend them. And there's a lot of different ways we could go. We're kind of picking some, but I'm not going to say what yet because I don't want to then have to decide in 4 weeks or 6 sprints that we're doing something else and then have wasted everyone's time. So that I'm not going to disclose yet.
Okay. No.
But I will say.
Oh, here we go. Insider knowledge.
Do you know what the big differences between, say, Angular 2 and Angular 1? You got
No,
quite.
I can't say I do.
No, okay, good. Neither does anyone else. But I think that the main thing that I noticed about it was that Angular 1 was very much based on a two-way data binding style of front-end development, where you try to write enough abstraction layer and enough sort of checking layer that there is just an implicit synchronization that occurs between your data as you update it and the view. That, okay, you change the data and then the view is just going to be fine. Like, oh, I modified the first name and that changes and that everything's fine. It reconciles. Two-way data binding is super convenient in some ways, but I think it's been shown to not scale well in others. People often make implicit connections by computing observable things based on other observable things, and then if they were asked to kind of define their architecture, it'd be like, well, it's like if an architecture got bit by a radioactive spider. But instead of like knowing that great responsibility comes with great power,
I love
it
these references.
Just kind of shot web all over the place. And so there were a lot of dependencies that were hard to trace. So two-way data mining is cool, and I think there are some systems that are still staking a lot on it, and they're well designed. But one thing I think we are going to move in the direction of, the same way that Angular did, the same way that a lot of folks have done, is towards a less bidirectional approach to data flow. We want to have a more unidirectional approach to data flow. And that is a high level. I know that's not super satisfying, and it hints at some choices, but it doesn't say them out loud. I'm sorry I have to do it this way, but I can say that it's a safer choice, because if we switch from one unidirectional framework or library to another, you can at least still say, like, start thinking about those types of architectures. In the unidirectional system, of course, rather than just like change the data and hope that it works, you want there to be a single kind of loop, a dispatch system, where when you make a change, there is one place where kind of all your data and all your state is held. And then that place knows that it's connected to the views, and it needs to say at a high level, this is the new state. And then the views are responsible for reconciling themselves at the end of that cycle. And it's a subtle difference, but one that allows, I think, for not only easier to reason about, like keep in your head systems, but also, and this is super cool, when you have components whose only responsibility is to take a new set of state and then look the right way, then what you can do is super cool development time work, where you can like kind of hot replace things and you make changes and they update right away, because your system that does that updating knows exactly how to set up and tear things down. That's consistent no matter where in the tree they need to make a change. Save the whole page, they're like, all right, refresh the whole page. Save this area, it's like, all right, just redo that area. So you have like a consistent way of doing, a consistent interface for all your components, then you can get to a really great place with the developer experience. And like I said before, that's really high on our list of priorities.
Oh, bro. That's fantastic.
So framework-wise, brand name-wise, sorry, not going to run down a list at this point, but architecture-wise, we know where we're going.
That's good then. As long as you know where you're going, I'm sure we'll all follow.
For real.
We've kind of already touched about it anyway, but I've got a question here. Is there a timeline? Is this a priority over other things on the Magento roadmap?
So yeah, definitely some stuff has been deprioritized or will have to be. Like I was just in a big meeting yesterday where we kind of tried to figure out that and try to figure out what if anything needs to get redone. But there's nothing that I think is being just like struck off the roadmap completely. It's more like we're gonna just redesign the minimum viable product for each thing. We made commitments, we're gonna keep to them. But the timeline is long for the full like holy grail thing I'm talking about, where everyone gets to build their own, and it's like the new way to do a Magento front end to some extent. But we know, because like I said at the beginning, the PWA thing is like the way to do the web now, that our individual efforts towards parts of this ecosystem, like maybe a little bit of the build, maybe a little bit of the developer experience stuff, maybe a little bit of architecture, as those things reach maturity, they can be of assistance to the other like legacy-ish or whatever, like Magento front ends. So we will try to contribute to community efforts, to contribute to like patch release cycles, as part of the PWA dev effort. Like that's part of how we scoped it. So we're not going to be nothing, big surprise.
Yeah.
We're gonna try to release things, and they're going to tell a story. So you would imagine?
Hopefully.
We've done this so many times. Like we've done this Lucy and the football thing where we go, "Oh, we're going to release by Imagine." So I'm not going to say it out loud, but
there's always something for Imagine. So if it's this,
there is, and there will be.
Yeah.
So sorry about not having it tomorrow, but
God, I wanted it yesterday.
So yeah, everything about progressive web apps is fast, except for the first time you make the system that makes them.
I think that's the same with everything, isn't it? Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say.
Yeah. There's so much more to talk about with this.
Do you think the rise of PWAs will see the downfall of native apps?
No, I think the place for native will become more clear. It will clarify.
Yeah.
Much in the same way that native desktop apps have clarified in the people's need for something that's bespoke and fast and addresses a particular need. You don't spend all your time, in Word making image collages anymore, and it just became clear what it's for and what it's not for.
Yeah.
In the same way, like native apps there will always be a place for games, for certain types of shopping, for certain types of interaction. But the web is a really powerful platform, and for both ephemeral experiences and increasingly for like really dedicated experiences that have a lot of stickiness. You do it right, and it's the place you can go. And we're going to help people do it right easier than ever.
Perfect.
God, that was so slick. I sound so good.
You did. That was like the perfect end, I think.
All right. Well, hey, it was really great to meet you.
You too. Thank you so much for talking to me.
No, this was a privilege for me, really. I mean, you have a perspective that we need and that I appreciate. And I really like the chance to talk in this way. So.
I'll speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.